Sure.
Okay, I'm starting it now. It'll just take a minute. All right, you're live.
Okay, this is the Dunn County Criminal Justice Collaborating Council Data Workgroup meeting. We'll go through with a roll call, and I'll have everybody state their names so everybody's aware who the participant is at the meeting. I can go first. My name is Katie Shalley. I'm the clerk of court.
I'm Sarah Benedict, Dunn County Criminal Justice Coordinator.
Deanna, you were muted. I saw your lips moving. There you go.
Sorry. Deanna Arnson, Deferred Prosecution Coordinator.
Chris Corporal, Human Services.
And that is all that we have appearing at the meeting today. At this point, I will ask for approval of the minutes from the meeting of March 10th.
So moved.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion needed about the meeting's minutes? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So I was saying no. Okay, minutes pass. We'll start with number 4, staff report.
Okay.
Guys, I'm sorry to say, can I just say this? I just finished 2 hours of a meeting and I have to pee. So I'm going to leave you guys for a minute while I go pee, and I'll be back.
Sounds great. We are live on YouTube, Chris. All right, well, maybe I will pause for a minute on the staff report. I'll give an update. I think Chris is aware of most of these things, and I will update her after the fact. Let's start off with the Data-Driven Justice Summit. So that was we are one of the Data-Driven Justice communities. That's an initiative with the National Association of Counties. And they were going to host a national summit this past spring, and that was put on hold until next year. So Katie Shalley, Clerk of Courts, and myself, we're going to attend on behalf of Dunn County for this summit. So we'll learn more, I guess, next spring, but that it has been postponed. I think initially they were looking at doing it later in the year, and now they've just altogether postponed it for the remainder of this year. But in the meantime, NACO has started some peer exchanges, some really online learning communities, and they reached out to us to join the Criminal Justice Planning and Policy Committee. So that one, or exchange, it's not a committee, it's just really an opportunity to get on a call or a webinar with other counties and cohorts out there to learn what they're doing. There was 2 meetings last week, and there's like 3 different focus areas. One is on the social services, one is on frequent utilizers, and then one is on the planning. But it was interesting because I did hear from other jurisdictions really how they're responding to some of the COVID pandemic adjustments. So some counties are, they've radically reduced their jail populations. Some of them are functioning and some of them are not. We did hear, by and large, the only thing that pretty much continues to function well are these specialty or treatment courts have been going on, but a lot of other programs, the amount of arrests are slowing down, the amount of people incarcerated are slowing down, the amount of cases are slowing down. So somewhat similar to what we're seeing here, but just on different scales. Those NACO peer exchanges have been just started up this month, and pretty neat. And then I give an update on our sequential intercept mapping. So that was a technical assistance award that we received for this year, where the policy research associates were going to come out here and host some meetings with our stakeholders to help us map the criminal justice system and the behavioral health system to look for, you know, opportunities, gaps, and help us really form a plan. So that has been modified. The good news is they are going to move forward with some virtual meetings. They're not coming on site, but we are just kind of getting reacquainted with the new format and layout. And we've got a meeting later on this week. So sounds like we will have some of these mapping groups this summer, later on this summer. And there'll certainly be some data points that we'll want to either gather from that, or that we learn that we need to maybe start gathering. But I'll keep this group updated as we go along with that planning and anything that we might need for data. That concludes my staff report at this time, unless there's questions.
No, thank you. We'll move to number 5, monthly dashboards for February, March, and April of 2020.
All right, I'm going to share my screen, and we can walk through the dashboards. We're going to start with February. So we had January published at our last meeting, and then we'll pick up here with February. We'll scroll a little bit down a little bit. That's a little bit too hard to see. So I did send out in the packets these are the draft versions. So typically we really compile the data. We as a work group look it over, kind of verify it, hone it, look at questions, and then if there's any corrections that we need to make, we're able to do that. And then these are posted on the CJC website off of the Dunn County website. So looking back in February, February was pre-pandemic. So the numbers here are pretty typical from what we've been seeing as far as trends. I do want to highlight that the average daily population of the jail is down quite a bit in 2020 compared to the last 2 years. And that we have inmates from the state prison system that we are housing. So that's what that 14 represents. So those are leased bed opportunities with the Dunn County Jail. So we really wanted to pull those out of our average daily numbers, because that really is a kind of a contracted service that we're providing. Bookings were, you know, average. I'll just really kind of hit some of the highlights. So really kind of just a typical month from what we typically see when we look at the breakdown, that 1 day in the jail, that snapshot. We typically see kind of a third or pre-trial, a third are serving probation hold, and then a third are actually serving a sentence. So pretty typical numbers here. Proxies have been trending lower, and we've seen that, but we still see the alcohol and other drug abuse to be the primary driver, and then continue to see disorderly conducts and battery. And we are tracking the percentage that are domestic. So pretty typical type of offense categories that we're seeing. Looking at the breakdown as well, we're seeing just kind of that typical population that we usually encounter. Stout, really, this was February. Numbers from Stout are typically low, and they just continue to get to be low. Looking at the pre-charge program, so that program continues to move ahead with new people signing up. We track the treatment opportunity program. We have our deferred prosecution agreements and the numbers that are revoked and for what reason. We've got our treatment court numbers, our family treatment court numbers. So those programs have been, you know, operating steadily, and this is back in February, so there were really just a typical month. Looking at the failures to appear and the text message reminders, a little bit of dip in the option to opt into that service of the text reminder system. But again, we're still seeing that where our numbers are a little bit non-typical in that the appearance rate for those that didn't get a text message is higher than those that did receive a text message, but it's only off by 3 percentage points, so pretty on par. But again, that's just one of those evidence-based practices that is effective. But we have a relatively good appearance rate. But when we're talking about that non-appearance rate, that still is you know, 20 cases, actually 54 cases there where, you know, the court was ready to go, the DA's office was ready to go, everyone's ready to go for court, but those folks didn't show up. So that still is, you know, a trend that we see, quite a few failures to appear. Looking at the second page of the February dashboard, as far as the jail intake and the assessment process, numbers were a little bit lower as far as the failures to appear. Granted, February is a shorter month, so you know, fewer people kind of came through our system. Of those that came through, we do offer them a assessment process or protocol, and about 51% actually participated in that. So that's where that information is then provided to the court, the DAs, and the public defenders. We're still seeing that as far as the results from these assessments, we still see that internalizing disorder to be a high severity level. And then the externalizing disorder is at a lesser degree, but that internalizing disorder has been fairly steady at that 50% rate for some time. When we see the breakdown of most problematic drugs on the drug screen, again, we see meth and alcohol to be the two most problematic substances that folks disclose. Then we track our number of assessments that are completed, including the domestic violence assessment. Looking at our reentry data, there are some discrepancies here that were carried over. So I'm going to backtrack and get this updated. The numbers here, we had 4 in the month of February. Overall, you know, we are trying to track the level of criminogenic needs. Those are the drivers of that criminal behavior, statistical drivers anyways, of the new enrollees. And then we're doing the cumulative really of that whole population that we're serving. That can help us track the needs that folks have so we can better match services for what they need. And then we also look at, with the case plans, we want to help them with certain areas if possible, and we are seeing that some of those needs here. So, and again, this is just February, so the numbers are fairly low here overall. So any questions on February before I go to the next month? All right. Let's see, I have to do that again, 1 second. March. And I'll go a little bit quicker here. Just kind of talk about some of the trends. So March is when the pandemic set in. So this is when we start to see some radical changes overall. So here's where our booking numbers are start to get impacted by the pandemic. I do want to double check on the Huber numbers because our numbers here are drastically lower. That could have reflected kind of that jail releasing, doing some early release. And then also the snapshot on the jail for March, 62% were considered pre-trial. just because of the impact of the pandemic, the number of proxies went down drastically. And then I think here, I need to double check on this. This is where we're looking at minorities. But if this is accurate, then there's definitely disproportionate contact in the month of March. Sometimes we have multiple staff working on these dashboards, and sometimes M is perceived as male because F is female. So I'm assuming that's what's happening here, but I don't have that raw data to double check that. So that's why I have that highlighted. Looking at the pre-charge of note, there was 5 that were referred directly from law enforcement. So that is definitely a positive trend there. Typically, it's the DA's office that identifies the folks for the pre-charge diversion program. So it's great if we can start that diversion even earlier by that law enforcement contact. Not much to report on the other programs. They really continue to kind of function along. There wasn't, we started to see an impact on the enrollments for the top program starting in March, and we're continuing to see that things are starting to pick back up. But there's definitely a delay in the case processing due to the pandemic. And then looking here again, this where, probably half of the month was somewhat normal. And then the second half of the month is when, we as a nation, us as a county, us as an employer really started to adjust due to the pandemic. So our numbers reflect that here. Now looking at, go back to the April numbers here quickly. And again, we're seeing even more effects of the pandemic. So average daily population cut in half, total bookings down drastically. Our numbers in the jail were down. Minority demographics, a little bit higher than twice as higher as that what we have seen in past years. And we're still seeing that pretrial population to be the majority of those in that snapshot. Proxies were way down, but again, we're still seeing some of those same trends with AODA being that primary. There wasn't much on the domestic front in April, but certainly the alcohol and other drugs charges were primary. Numbers here, pre-charged continue to take folks in the program, so that's great. Here's where the top program, the new enrollments and just the referrals really started to take a downward trend. Now, this is April data. We're in June. Things have started to pick up as far as referrals to that program, but we're anticipating that coming down the road. I would report that treatment court did have a termination in April, and we've had terminations in subsequent months as well. So this pandemic really has been difficult on a lot of people, and some of the people stay connected and some people don't stay connected. And those are the ones that we really want to work to get connected, because we know that when drugs and alcohol can be that driver of that criminal activity, the resumption of using drugs and alcohol can often result in a new criminal offense, not necessarily possession, but where it could be domestic violence, it can be trafficking, other major crimes.
Sarah, before you switch fields, so in looking at that failure to appear rate, I think that's statistically interesting. because it dropped somewhat significantly in both categories in that month. But I was wondering if you go back to like, say, February, how many cases were represented in February? So there's 644 criminal cases in April. Like,
Yep.
what would February have looked like?
Let's take a look here. Let's see, February 661.
Oh, so basically the kind of the same numbers. Because what makes me think about that, because April would have been virtual appearances only, right?
Correct. By phone in April.
Yeah.
Or a little bit of Zoom, but mainly phone.
Are there clues? You know, we talked about that. How do you address that failure to appear rate when you talk about in February, 54 cases, in April, 23 cases, and relatively the same size group? You know, like that's a pretty significant impact on court operations in terms of failure to appear. It's half. And are there clues in that in terms of people's ability to appear via phone or electronically? Not that we have necessarily the ability to implement that as a system, but I just think that's interesting data.
It is, and thanks for highlighting that, Chris, because right, it is showing that there's a better appearance rate when there's the option to do it by phone or via video.
Which probably has a
chime in. I would note that I think that there was probably maybe a little bit more generosity in the very beginning, starting in April, whereas if there was a hearing and maybe somebody didn't appear, it got rescheduled versus the warrant issued. So if it was rescheduled, it wasn't treated as a failure to appear. So that maybe could skew the numbers, but I'm not saying that there weren't more that appeared by Zoom just because of the convenience either.
Right. Well, that'll be interesting when we look at May and June numbers too, to see if we're, continuing to see some of those same trends or if it changes. For April, as far as the assessment process, that's when the jail really halted. So let me go back to March. So in March, the jail did a remodeling of the booking counter, which really limited space. So they were unable to do some of the jail classes and unable for the volunteers and some of the program folks to go into the jail. They just had a reduce space. So things slowed down in March for reentry, but then by the time April came, really the ability to get in the jail and do some of those assessments stopped as far as doing the pretrial assessment piece, where we looked at the mental health disorders and drug screens. The assessment process for the programs continued, and the jail did allow that by phone and help set up some of those virtual assessment processes. So the numbers for April, there was no new folks that were brought into the reentry program. That is true for May and true for June. July 1st, the reentry program, the jail's opening back up to the reentry peer specialist. So that means we'll be able to get the orientations going, the classes going, and the resumption of those services. Any questions on the dashboards or other points of interest that we should follow up on?
So from a data perspective,
Sarah, I have one thing.
I think, I was gonna say, from a data perspective, I think that we're going to have to think about how does this year get reflected in the cumulative data, because otherwise it's going to look pretty skewed.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't know. I mean, it's not an issue that has to be resolved today, but I mean, if you're looking back and you're like, wow, what happened in 2020? Like anyone's going to forget, but
yeah, that's why we did want to even, put it on the dashboard, because maybe years from now when we look back, we won't recall or kind of wipe this out of our memory, but we did want to make note of that because we're going to have an anomaly this year just with skewed data.
Yeah.
Sarah, I have one thing. Yes, I did. So if you go to the first page of each month, so in February, in the box for the DAGPs, you have year-to-date agreements entered, or agreements. We have 25. And then in March, we have 22. And then in April, we jump down to 18.
Okay.
So I'm not quite sure what math is going on there, but for April, for the number of DAGPs entered in that year-to-date, I have 94.
Okay,
that's the information I had sent over.
Okay.
And I can give you the other months if you need.
Yeah, would you mind doing that, Deanna? Because then we can make sure that we get this updated.
Yep, I'll send that over after.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, back to you, Katie.
Okay, number 6, the 10-year data trends presentation status.
Okay, so this is what we were, our last meeting in March, we really walked through this, this PowerPoint presentation that we have delivered, kind of modified moderately each year, but we walked through it and talked about what we wanted to keep and what we wanted to get rid of as far as kind of those 10-year trends. So I just wanted to update the group on what is still needed. I guess one thing is a little bit challenging is a lot of the annual reports are not published or they're not available. So nothing is on the Dunn County website for 2020 or 2019 annual reports. It goes back to 2018. So, and I know just with the county board schedule changing and the annual reports schedule changing, that they might not have been posted because they weren't presented. I know a lot of them were prepared and we have a schedule to prepare those. So but a lot of the data that we use from the other agencies are actually within those annual reports. So those are still outstanding overall. But then we do need, you know, data. Megan was going to bring back some of the MPD data. She couldn't join us today, so I'll follow up with her. Katie, you were going to look at the case filings for 2019 and break them down. And typically that's something that's also part of your annual report where it was already kind of available. I will connect with DOC. We want to get some updated numbers from the Department of Corrections. And then we have our dashboard gives us some of the our numbers with the different programs. So we've got program numbers, but we're looking for those agency numbers. So I will connect and try to get those annual reports directly from those department heads so we can get this updated. We've already kind of talked about what we wanted to have in our presentation. So once I get the data, I'll update that. And then I think the anticipation was that we would have this prepared for the August CJCC meeting. So I think that's still reasonable as long as those annual numbers are available. And I think they are, they're just not published right now. I was just going to say that would just allow us to have maybe at our next meeting in July that we can actually, you know, make sure that we have everything and we're ready to go on that presentation for August.
That sounds good. I'll email you my stuff right after this meeting today, Sarah, so we'll be good. Number 7 is regroup on recidivism project.
All right, so this is our major project that we're doing this year. I'm going to share my screen and pull up our shared, if I can find it. What did I already change it? No. Let's see. I think I probably closed it by accident, but here we go. Let's see, what's this? There it is. Okay. So we have this spreadsheet. This is a Google shared spreadsheet between the Sheriff's Office, the DA's office, the Clerk of Courts, and the CJC division, where we're updating this as far as the different programs. We've got pre-charge diversion, we got the cohort year, and we really tried to identify the folks that were in the program, the dates of those programs, and then we wanted to look at recidivism following the program. So we had a lot of different folks all in these spreadsheets kind of putting in information. It looks like they're all in kind of different states of updating. I know the treatment court one is not updated because some of these folks are not with the program anymore. So to regroup, we were really going to get through the end of the year and get this updated. So that needs to happen. Deanna, I don't know if the pre-charge diversion is up to date.
It's probably, I need to go back and check on that. I know I had in the beginning during the pandemic, I had some extra time then, and now I need to go back and add some more information, more individuals. Yeah.
I think that's really how it is with most of the programs where, it started to happen, but then things kind of, shifted and, and that's where we'll, so we really want to get the program names and the details through the end of 2019. But those, Katie's group has already did a lot of the CCAP checks. So even though we're still getting the names of the program participants from 2019, we still have the data that we can crunch on the recidivism of the ones that are already post-program. So Katie, thank you to you and your staff for doing that, because that's a huge undertaking. Well, thank you everybody, Deanna and Sandy, and really everybody that's helped with this. But there is definitely more work that needs to be done on this. So I think the first thing is just making sure that the names from 2019 are in there. And then looks like we've got the clerk of court data, but then we can start to crunch it. And what we talked about before really as the process was, oh, I just had it, now it's gone. We really wanted to look at, excuse me, we wanted to analyze really the total numbers that completed the program during those years, and then the numbers that didn't have new charges. So we really were trying to simplify this. So we need to update the numbers, and then we can start to crunch the data. That I think is where we're at overall with that project, that collaborative project.
I've been trying month by month to go through it. So if there's anybody new completions, I'm trying to do name searches, but it kind of depends on when that start and end date is. So I think it's going to be a work in progress for quite some time. It's never really going to go away, I don't think, because we'll look at that 3 and 5 year mark.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's really cleaning up that data and making this a usable kind of template that we can continue to use over the years. Yep.
Did we want to bring or present any of that at our August CJCC meeting, or do we feel like that's a little premature at this point?
Well, we'll work on it. Maybe we'll see where we're at, but potentially we could, if we've got, the data on those older years. I think there's an option.
Perfect. The next agenda item is number 9, the OWI Data Drive.
Okay, so this was a new last meeting. It was suggested, OWIs, I guess it's not new, right? We've talked a lot about OWIs over the years, and we've definitely identified them as one of our major drivers of crime in our community. So we wanted to, at our last meeting, we wanted to dig in a little bit more to the OWIs. So Katie, I'm going to share my screen because you quickly after that meeting, you had sent data on the OWIs. So let me pull it up. From 2019. We were at our last meeting, we were kind of curious about the ability to map the OWIs. So that's certainly something that we can do, but as far as the analysis piece, I just started to kind of dig in a little bit to this 2019 data, and it is fascinating. So this is just 1 year. We had 271 total OWIs. Now, Katie, this is criminal and non-criminal, correct?
Correct. Yep. And it includes operating with a restricted controlled substance as well. So just not specifically alcohol related, any operating while under the influence or of a controlled substance.
Okay. Right. And it was hard some of the reports had that information of a controlled substance, some didn't. But it's that data is a little bit deeper and harder for us to reach at this point with this report anyways. But just looking at that total 271, 84% of those were Wisconsin residents. So only 16% were out of state. You know, we got the interstate cutting our right through the county. So we've got a lot of folks that are traveling. So, you know, 16%, I think that's quite a bit. Most of those folks are from Minnesota, and then just a smattering of other out of state folks. But of that 271, 51% were Dunn County residents. So I was surprised by that. I was expecting a higher percentage to be Dunn County residents. So this is that they actually live in Dunn County. The OWIs reflect, you know, doesn't matter where they live, they just were arrested here in Dunn County. 8% were Eau Claire residents, so I thought that was interesting. And then we do have the list there, you know, as far as where folks live and where the offense occurred as well. So just with this information, I couldn't quickly sort it. We'll have to do it by hand, but we really do have the ability to map where the offenses occurred to see if we do have, I guess, what information we can glean from that or some hot spots. But as far as the issuing agency, well, let me go back to the residents. So 97 of those 140 lived in Menominee. So what's going on in those, again, this isn't where they're getting picked up, it's where they live. So it does seem that the center, and it's the largest community in our county, so it does make sense that Menominee would have, you know, the most residents there. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And then looking down at the issuing agency, you know, 45% came from the state, so state troopers. So I guess that we can presume that's not just interstate travel, but, you know, it could be other roads too, but that the impact of the interstate is definitely seen here. And then 31% of those OWIs were from the county, 24% were from the city. And then Colfax and Boyceville just had a small amount. So that's just kind of getting started looking at this OWI data. I know we do have a CJCC executive meeting tomorrow, and Chair Judge Peterson is interested in us looking more at potential for OWI courts. So depending on how that conversation and those decisions go, there could be more of a need for us to kind of formulate some data as it pertains to OWIs. Looking at, oh, please go ahead.
Can I just ask Katie a question? Katie, how far back could you go, not year by year, but for a point in time, like could you do not the whole analysis, but just a numbers, total OWI numbers from say 10 years ago?
Yeah, I could run a every year report, just how many were issued, and we could sort them out by agency if we want, really easily.
Because I just have this vague memory that might be totally inaccurate, but I have this memory from probably, you know, a dozen years ago or whatever, where our OWI numbers were up in like the 400s. And so I'm just curious.
Yeah,
sort
I
of
can
whether
definitely
we-
run and report.
I don't know what that says. I just think it's I think it would be interesting to kind of look at as the message about not drinking and driving has grown over time. Has that changed our actual numbers or not?
I think Sarah's muted maybe.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know if you can see my screen. I think I'm sharing my screen, where I've got, this is the, it ended with 2008, our trend data, but you're right, Chris, and these were just criminal OWIs, where it did hit over that 400 mark.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Just number running, and I'll run some numbers because this was really interesting because I think I even included like time of offense. And the address thing too was just based off of their address that was issued on their citation or on their criminal complaint if it was a crime. So, I mean, that might not be a truly accurate address. It's just what they gave law enforcement at that time. But I think the numbers were pretty interesting, even date of offense, the time, and when I was able to capture that blood alcohol level or even just restricted controlled substance. I mean, it was quite a bit of meth, and THC was the positive.
I was going to say that's what would be interesting too. How many of them are straight alcohol? Well, I realize that it might not just be straight alcohol, but where the alcohol is the driver and the controlled substances are the driver.
It was an interesting project. I didn't know what to expect out of it, but I mean, I literally went into every single case that we had. So it was a lot of information diving. So it interesting to say the least.
I'm surprised I think I'm surprised by the high representation of cases from the State Patrol.
Right. At least, yeah. And this is 2019, so it would be a regular year.
See them as I mean, obviously you see State Patrol officers all over, but I mean, I certainly see them as, patrolling the interstate, but they have 45% of the cases. Like that's significant. I don't know. Again, I don't know. I have any idea what that means, but it's just, I was surprised by that number.
Right.
So I also realize if I'm going to go drinking, I'm going to Boyceville and drinking and driving. Oh, I'm on Zoom.
So as far as kind of next steps here, what other types of information would we like to kind of learn about? Or Chris, you had a couple of real good kind of questions and feedback, but as far as, kind of what else do we want to know as far as this data? Do we
have the BACs from these?
Yes, I believe we do have the BACs.
Because that was really interesting that first time when we looked at them, just to plot those.
Yep. Let's see.
I personally think it would be interesting to know how many of these individuals then go on to pick up a case of OAR, because that also is tying up court time.
Or OAS, or OARs, yep.
Yeah.
Which we could do. I mean, I'd pretty much have to take all of their names and then do a search, see if they had any charges after this and then what the information was. So yeah, here's the BAC.
Yep.
Okay.
I did include agency case number too, because I didn't know if we wanted to dig that far, because sometimes the cases get resolved, especially maybe a first offense. They don't have the results back from the lab yet.
Yeah.
We make an agreement, and I don't know what their blood alcohol level is, so.
Right.
If you want to run, if you want somebody just to look up the post OWI OARs or OASs, I could have somebody do that.
If you do, I would definitely love to train them, because this was probably a good 40 plus hours into just doing some search and data entry. But I actually had a lot of it, but you just had to flip through a lot of pages and wait for documents to load. But every time I didn't know what I was going to expect. So it was interesting.
Wow. Well, thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. Yeah, so there's just tons of interesting things that we can glean out of this. So we can, like we did before, and kind of broke it down by that age, the sex, the offense. We did have a OWI 10. There was 110, a lot of firsts, because that can also we can just learn more about that. With that first, maybe that's more of that preventative message. But then when we're talking maybe about an OWI court, we're looking at that fourth, fifth, but the data can help us to see that, just learn a lot about the folks that are coming into our criminal justice system.
Well, I think that would be that'd be the other number. How many were ones, how many were twos, how many were threes, how many were fours? I know we've looked at that a little bit before, but
yep. Okay. Any other thoughts on the OWI data?
Thanks, Katie. That is fascinating.
No problem. That's why I'm in the data work group. I like this stuff, so it's fun.
Great. Well, we'll keep working on the data, and also work on plotting it to the offense location, but then kind of break it down as you guys all mentioned. I took some notes, so great.
Well, and I know, Sarah, you said only 16% of them were out of state, but that's statistically, that's a big number.
It is.
16% of 271.
Yeah, it was like 44 or something.
Yeah, 43, a little over 43, between 43 and 44. Yeah, that's that's a lot of our resource tied up in people that we probably have limited to no ability to influence their future actions.
Right. Yep. All right. Go back to Katie.
The next agenda item is the next meeting date to be determined.
Well, I would recommend that since we've dusted everything off, that we meet again in July.
I agree.
And that would be ahead of our August CJCC meeting. So depending on where we're at with the different projects, we can kind of look to prep those things for the CJCC meeting and continue to dive into the OWI data. I would propose that we do something maybe later in the month of July versus earlier, just because of the 4th of July holiday. And I know a lot of folks are, gonna take some time off, or, but Katie, I think whether you want to just let us know, or I can do a doodle based on what you have available, or we can just decide right here based on us having our own calendars.
I was going to say July 21st or 28th work for me. It's a
21st would be preferable for me.
That sounds good. Deanna, does that work for you?
Yep, either one of those dates will work.
Should we do the 21st?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because then that extra time to, if I need it, to before the CJCC. All right.
So Katie, I will figure out, I have some clerical staff that have been a little bit low on work while our building is closed or looking for projects. So I'll figure out who amongst that I'll make contact with you, and you can put them to work.
Perfect. That would be good. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Thanks, Chris. All right. So Chris will follow up with maybe having some staff trained with Katie on that OAR. Katie, you were going to send me some numbers from 2019.
Yep. And I'll do a 10-year OWI analysis too, or get those numbers, and we can decide if we want to break down those anymore and then go from there.
Great. And then Deanna, you were going to send me the corrections on the dashboard so we can be sure to get those updated.
Yep, and I'll get my recidivism information updated.
All right. And then I will also get those recidivism lists with the different programs updated, and then start to do the cohort analysis to see how it's looking. And we'll report back at our next meeting.
Well, I think on a humorous note from our data, we should definitely say that the CJCC is uber effective as based by the March, April, and May data. I mean, we're just making changes in leaps and bounds. We don't have any people in any programs. Our jail numbers are in half. Our booking rates are in half.
Right.
It's
interesting, Chris, because as far as the trends that are going out there, we are drastically changing who we're deciding to put into jail and who we're not. And some of the jurisdictions that did a kind of a mass release, they're not seeing people come back in. So it'll be interesting, and we're still in the thick of it, so it's hard to tell how everything will land. But it is kind of showing that we can do some radical things and still have a safe community. So, but we'll have to see in time. We'll keep watching the numbers as we go.
Well, without their attaching any, if this is possible, without attaching any political, whatever notion to it. I mean, the whole, however people talk about like defunding the police, really what they talk about, really that whole argument with any credibility is around expansion of alternate programs. And so I don't know that anyone who works in the criminal justice system would advocate for defunding law enforcement, but you can see that there are, like you say, sort of, there is data to support that doing something different can have different outcomes as well.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect. Well, meeting is adjourned then. We're good. Good afternoon.
All right. Thank you.